Let's go across to our guest joining us. Dr. Azrael Bermon is Senior Researcher, Institute of International Relations, Prague. He's joining us from Jerusalem. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat is former Indian diplomat. Professor Max Abrahams is international security expert. Nadav Steinman is chairman of the board of the International Legal Forum. Nadav, why don't I begin with you? We've seen many justifications of this terror attack on Israel come forth. And it is not anybody's contention, and certainly not my contention, that this is a very simple issue. But I want to understand from you, regardless of the past history between Palestine and Israel or Hamas and Israel, can there be any justification for what we've witnessed over the weekend, the attack on Israel?
I want to ask a simple question. Can you, and picture this. If there was a justification, that justification has to be looked at in the eyes of babies and toddlers put in cages. You would have to be able to say that, and every report that you showed, and every demonstrator that you showed, every single one of them would have to be able to justify their actions for asking for more murder and death, and say that justification in the eyes of those toddlers currently in cages in Gaza. Is that a possibility? Is that any reasonable human being can do that? Is any humanitarian view other than saying the deplore this behavior? Don't talk to me. Talk to those babies. Talk to the 85-year-old women who were dragged on the street. Look at those faces and say, I am justifying the behavior that is caused to you and the actions that we did to you. Can you say that to a child put in a cage? All grown adults can say what they want, but justify that behavior by looking at the cages of children that were kidnapped out of the arms of their children. I'm sorry. There is no justification for these kinds of actions. I am not here to talk about a side. If we're talking about justification of actions, it's deplorable on any human scale.
And yet there are those justifications coming in. Nadav, I want you to respond one more time before I open this up. There are justifications not just coming from, obviously, Arab countries who support Palestine. At the same time, they want to draw a distinction between Hamas and Palestine. And obviously, they talk about how the brutalities that have been suffered by the Palestinian over a period of time, not just over the last 20 years, but over the last 70 years, for example, is why this has happened. That this was bound to happen, and this has happened because of the Israeli oppression. But what I also don't understand is that how do you attack unarmed civilians in your fight against an oppressive force? And then how do you still argue that you should get sympathy for what has transpired? It is mind-boggling to separate Hamas and Palestine, even if I was to take that argument at one level, but to support Hamas attack in itself is coming across as a shock. And this has come from countries, this has come from think tanks, this has come from academics. Some major universities in the world have done this.
I find that as human beings, we must be humans first. We must take our political agenda second. I cannot accept any justification of these kinds of heinous actions. If you do, if anybody does, I don't care what side of any political argument you are, if you are accepting that kind of justification of that kind of random slaughter, then you are acting like Nazis and their sympathizers. I see no other way to describe it. And I'm not being overly dramatic here. I'm just trying to talk about from a concept of our history of humans in the past 100 years. We've witnessed World War II. We've witnessed the crimes against humanity. We witnessed murder and slaughter. We witnessed all these things. How can we say there is ever a justification? We know as a matter of law, and I am a lawyer who defends Israel, I am saying that as a matter of international law, they have broken every single potential law there is in the act of war. I am saying that the world community has come together years ago and offered what we agree can be acts of war, legitimate acts of war. None of the acts by Hamas fall into any legitimate act of war as a matter of international law. It's every single thing that they have done is wrong. It is up to the world to say that. It's not just us sitting here or me sitting in my sealed room in Jerusalem because there have been attacks and more bombs are coming. I have to be in a secure place. It's not just about me. It's about what the world voice has to be on these issues. And these issues have to be brought to the forefront. We cannot accept the random slaughter of children, of old women. We cannot accept these. There is zero justification. You can be anti-Israel, but why do you have to be anti the killing and slaughter of children? Say that to the faces of those children. That's what I stand by.
Dr. Israel Bamon, I want to come to you because the argument that has been given by those who have supported Hamas attack is that the Palestinians have suffered equally, if not worse, because of the Israeli quote occupation. Is that a justifiable response?
Oh, I agree with what Nadav said. I think that if you justifying the barbaric actions of Hamas, we're talking about mass slaughter of civilians, nearly 1,000 killed, abduction of women, elderly, children, which is a war crime, and dragging these dead bodies through the streets of Gaza. Even I should emphasize here that even organizations on the left, civil rights organizations, are strongly supporting the Palestinians, such as Breaking the Silence, for example, have made it clear that what Hamas has done is a war crime. It's a despicable action. There is no hope for humanity if if anyone justifies the actions of Hamas, these actions by Hamas. That doesn't mean that the Palestinians haven't suffered, and certainly there is an ongoing occupation. We're talking about 55 years now since the Six-Day War of the West Bank. Although Gaza itself is not occupied by Israel, Israel does control the airspace and the borders for Gaza, but Israel does not occupy Gaza. West Bank, of course, it does occupy, but there is no excuse whatsoever, no justification for what Hamas did.
Yet there is justification coming in. So very quickly, why do you think that's happening? You mentioned human rights activists, groups, leftist organizations that stand for peace and against violence are doing it quite openly. So why do you think that's the case?
You're saying what? Are justify what Hamas has done, or
Yes.
criticizing?
They've justified Hamas's attack, or they have stood more on the side of Palestine after that Hamas attack. So why do you think that's happening? If it is so obvious to all of us that Hamas's actions cannot be justified, why do you think these groups are still doing so?
There are organizations, extreme organizations, that will support. You have Islamic. There are organizations which have put themselves beyond the pale on the margins, which have, so we say, supported Hamas or shown some sympathy. But anyone who really cares, about the Palestinians, who genuinely cares, and but the Palestinian cause, the Palestinians have a right to their own state. They have a right. They should be able to enjoy the rights, their own political rights, in the same way that Israel enjoys its own right as a sovereign state. But if you're going to justify what Hamas has done, you're actually undermining the Palestinian cause. What they should be doing, those on the extremes I'm talking about here, those on the extremes should be saying Hamas has carried out a barbaric action. This is a war crime. This is a violation of the most basic human rights, and this is not going to help the Palestinians. There are plenty of other organizations, responsible organizations, that have condemned Hamas, but have at the same time condemned Israel's actions. For example, the building of settlements, annexation of Palestinian land. There have been settler attacks against Palestinians, innocent Palestinians. These must be condemned. But there's no question that Hamas has undermined the Palestinian cause.
Yes, and ultimately, many feel that it's going to be ordinary Palestinians who would suffer. But I want to come to exactly this question. Professor Max Abrahams, I want to understand from you. Several people are also saying that you cannot confuse Hamas with Palestine. or Palestinians. Yet we saw that most Palestinians celebrated these Hamas attacks. There has been no condemnation that has come from Palestinians themselves on the barbaric, brutal nature of these attacks. So how do you look at that argument that actually Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians and their actions should not be equated with the Palestinian state?
Well, I agree that the Hamas.
Sorry, this is for
That's
Max.
honestly
Yes.
yeah. That's honestly a tough one to disentangle Hamas from the Palestinian population based out of Gaza. Hamas was actually elected in 2006. We haven't had They haven't had elections for a while there. They do rely on coercion. So how do you separate them? If you look at surveys, and some of them are surprisingly reliable of Palestinians, you look at their views, and extremism is actually very popular in terms of levels of support for martyrdom operations and suicide terrorism and the full right of return and ensuring that Israel no longer has a Jewish majority. So many of these positions, which are completely incompatible with the existence of Israel, do have resonance broadly in these Palestinian communities, especially within Gaza. And that poses a difficulty for the Israeli military in terms of knowing what to do with Hamas. The goal now, and I think it should be the goal, is to destroy Hamas. Now, I know some people might disagree with me, but I believe that for a while, I didn't always support that view because Hamas did keep its violence in reserve. It did not try to max out on its violence. It could have done more damage than it actually did. It was wearing a political hat, a military hat. But what we've seen from the latest round of, this terrorist rampage is that Hamas is actually trying to max out on the level of violence. It shot 2,000 plus rockets in a few hours. Hamas's tactics have become more radical than they previously were. It is not a propaganda talking point when Netanyahu says that Hamas is looking like ISIS. I study for a living and have written, books and many articles on the different tactics available to militant groups, and I rank them in terms of their levels of extremeness. What we've seen now is that Hamas is taking grandmothers and people, in wheelchairs and Holocaust survivors and babies and assassinating them at point blank range and then broadcasting it over social media, putting it on Facebook. That is a page out of ISIS's playbook. These are people who cannot be negotiated with. And although it's true that removing Hamas is not going to resolve all of Israel's terrorism problems, surely there will be replacements, there'll be successors, etc. At this point, I would take my chances. I would do everything possible to attrit the organization, mindful that there are, in fact, many Palestinian civilians. And of course, Israel should do its utmost to avoid any harm towards the population. But that is a very, very difficult military task when Hamas is embedded in a population of 2.2 million people. There are booby traps everywhere. There are snipers everywhere. No matter how much Israel tries to soften up Gaza by taking out, military targets from the air before going in, it's going to be extraordinarily dangerous when Israel does go in. And so, unfortunately, this is the beginning of the military response. It's going to be a lengthy process. And when Israel goes, there's going to be a lot of so-called collateral damage. There will be many Palestinian civilians killed and injured, and that's inherent to the nature of this military campaign. And what we also expect to happen is that Nasrallah and Hezbollah most likely will not remain on the sidelines.
Yes.
A second front is going, and most likely will open up. And there'll be more attacks inside Israel, new salvos based on Hezbollah rockets. And it raises all sorts of questions. Israel's going to, make countless sorties into southern Lebanon, possibly into Syria. The United States, frankly, could also get involved if Nasrallah just completely opens up on Israel. And there are strong implications in terms of U.S. and Israeli military responses against Iran itself, not just against the militant groups that it sponsors.
Yes. No, that is definitely a real worry right now of how much this war can expand. I will, of course, look at that question in days to come. But Mr. Trigunayat, I want to come to you as well. You know, what I am fundamentally trying to grasp my head around is the fact that in the 21st century, where we're actually witnessing visuals of the barbarism that Hamas has perpetuated on the Israeli people, there are still people, we're still not together in the condemnation. There are still people who are finding justifications or giving intellectual cover to this terror. And of course, that rings very close to our hearts in India because we have suffered this for a very, very long time. And this is, if any, there was a case, a complete exposure of people who claim to stand for peace and humanity, because many of them are supporting Hamas today.
Well, Shivani, I fully agree, and I convey my condolences to our Israeli friends and the other civilians who are being killed in this war. You see, anyone...
Ambassador, just have to interrupt you because we have lost your audio. I'm going to attempt one more time. Please continue. All right. It seems like we've lost his audio. I'm really sorry for that, Ambassador, but we'll try and go back across to him. But Max, can I ask you, what do you make of this intellectual cover being provided? We've seen, and I'm running those visuals of actually neo-Nazis coming out on the streets of other countries, displaying Nazi symbols or asking for Jews to be gassed in the open. And some of these countries don't seem to be reacting. Nobody's being picked up for what is clearly hate speech.
Yeah, if you were to go around college campuses and you were to find, in the United States, and you were to find swastikas, some people might think, oh, that must come from the far right. That must come from, right-wing extremism. But actually, if I were a detective on this case, my leading assumption would be actually that it comes from the far left.
Yes.
The truth is that the far left in the West has been deeply radicalized. And although it's true, there are many critics of Zionism who are not anti-Semites. I know many of them, and I'm even friends with a bunch of them. The fact is that many of the strongest anti-Zionists, or at least a whole lot of them, are anti-Semites.
So that has been used as a cover sometimes for what is pure anti-Semitic activity. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you short. Ambassador Trigunayat is back.
If you go to a pro-Palestine rally,
yes,
and there are many of them in the United States. There was one not far at all from where I am right now, just yesterday. You'll see anti-Semitism is absolutely rife. And often it's completely detached from anything having to do with Israel.
Right.
When they say, gas the Jews and they have swastikas, that's just straight up anti-Semitism.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with the Israel-Palestine conflict or doesn't help the Palestine cause at all. I just want to go back across to Ambassador Trigunayat because he got interrupted. We lost his audio. Yes, sir, continue.
Well, as I said earlier, that nobody can condone what has happened. It should be condemned. The attack against the civilians, the women, the children, and the way it was done. There is no doubt about it, absolutely. And Hamas has had 4 or 5 wars with Israel now. And this has been going again and again. And every time Israel has been able to pound them down and thinking possibly that it has done with it. So it looks like to me now I mean, that this strategy needs to change somehow. I mean, there are, you can decimate people, you can kill people, but that they will rise once again. So one will have to, with the right kind of Palestinians who want to negotiate, who wants their right solution, justified solution to the Palestinian cause, then
But sir,
this is
if
the
I have
time.
it correct, even the UN mandated a two-state policy. The Arabs and the other countries and the Palestinians refused it.
Everybody agreed. Two-state solution has been agreed by everyone. There have been Oslo Accords, there have been different Camp David and other. So, but at the same time, this has not really happened. So
Yeah.
there is a root cause to any kind of a problem that continues to happen. And in that kind of a situation, terrorist groups take precedence and take advantage of a cause. They make a cause out of it. That's precisely what is happening in India. We see the terror people coming here and they are attacking. We have 40 years we are facing from this terror attack, so we know what terrorism is all
Yeah.
about. Therefore, terrorism has to be condemned. But the Palestinian cause is a very different thing, which everybody agrees. Even the Israelis agree. Very large number of Israelis agree that we need to sit together. We need to stand side by side. And another thing is that you see, the religion is a very sensitive place in this whole place, Jerusalem. That the incidents in Al-Aqsa, the kind of approach that the ultra-right government has recently taken, in terms of violation of the sanctity of the places. Now, that obviously is generating a lot of heartburn among most of the people. Islamic world. I mean, that is what I'm saying. That's why when you are seeing that the Arab world or the Islamic world is not condemning this attack, the reason is not Palestinian cause. There is a greater fatigue for the Palestinian cause. But what is they feel is that there has been a disrespect to their third holiest mosque, which is being plundered. So this is something that the Israelis and the Israeli government must look into it. It
Okay.
has to change the strategy. It is important that peace should exist there. I mean, as some of the people have been saying here, that the war can escalate further. Now, tomorrow you will be seeing thousands of people will be killed in Gaza. Maybe Gaza will be decimated completely. It's possible because Israel has that kind of firepower. But will that end this? We have seen in
No,
the
of course
past.
not. I think nobody is suggesting that this is either not a complicated situation with the rights of both sides, or that this can be solved very quickly, or that a military offensive is going to be an answer to this. You're very right about that. But in this case, I'm not sure how Israel is supposed to respond after a breach and an attack like this. But this is a complicated issue. I've run out of time. I do thank all of you for your time. We'll, of course, in the days coming, also continue to look at this. We will try to provide you more historical context as well as far as this conflict is concerned.